Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Wednesday Night Live on June 3rd, 2020. Very glad that you could join us tonight. We are not live, however. We have recorded this episode of Wednesday Night Live because we didn't know whether there would be a curfew in the city tonight. Turns out there is not a curfew, but we are still recording it. So, anyways, I'm Bob Hymack.
And I'm Maureen Wilson.
And we're very glad that you have joined us. Let's begin with some quick updates about the church and other things. First of all, I want to take a personal moment and thank everybody for notes of sympathy and text messages and phone calls in the passing of my mom a week and a half, 2 weeks ago now. I very much appreciate all of you for reaching out for me. It really does help to get letters and phone calls, and just to know that people are thinking about you and lifting you up in prayer. So thank you, everyone, for that. For church news, the session has decided that we will not be worshiping in the sanctuary during June. Our live stream, of course, will continue each Sunday, and session will reevaluate about the middle of June when we will begin meeting in worship. So no in worship or no in sanctuary worship this in June. Also, if you drive by the church, and I encourage you to do so, you will see a banner that has been erected outside. It is a banner of hope and inspiration, and we encourage you to go by that banner, and there's a little Sharpie pencil that you can use and write a note. Write your name, a note of good cheer, a greeting, a scripture, some inspiring message. That would be wonderful if we could hear from you. Take a picture while you're at it, and we'll post it on Facebook or some other social media. So I think that's all I have for the moment.
Along with the sale of the hospitality house, we have lost our garden, our original IPC garden, but fear not. A new garden has gone into place on the north side?
Northeast side of
It's there.
Yeah,
It's that way.
That way.
The new garden is in, and in a cruel twist of fate, the only thing planted are Bob's favorite, tomatoes.
It's really discouraging. Nobody cares.
It's almost as if the congregation doesn't like you very much.
It's just like that.
You should probably include it in a sermon once in a while.
I'll never mention them again.
Last night, our Messy Church team recorded a live Messy Church, virtual Messy Church. We were joined by some of our Messy Church families, but we know life can get messy even for Messy Church, and so if you didn't get a chance to participate and watch it live, it is on our Facebook, so you can do the crafts and you can hear the stories and sing the songs along, whatever time is comfortable for you and your family, and we thank the team for putting that together. My last church update is that the staff is going to be returning to the building. Now, I want to be kind of clear about this. Starting next week, Bob, myself, and Lori will be in the church Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. So if you're trying to get a hold of us, please call. It's not going to be like we're fully opening up, so, I would love to see you, but if you just stop on by to come and talk, that's not going to work quite yet. That said, we are going to be here, so if you've been trying to get a hold of the church, want to talk to somebody, we are going to be here at 10 to 2 starting next week. Did I miss anything on that?
Yeah, there'll be a couple more precautions, having the office door locked and things like that. But listen or read the Friday email this Friday, and you'll find out more about the details of our opening. All right.
I can finally put my books in my office.
Yeah, it's good that Mo will finally get settled after, how many months has it been? 3 or
1 million.
4 months, yes. All right, well, for the main section of Wednesday Night Live, we have shifted our focus a little this week because of the social unrest that has been happening over the past week and a half. And so since the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis a week ago Monday, our country has turned into a chaotic mix of protest and violence around issues of racial injustice. Our own city of Indianapolis has experienced daily protest marches that were for the most part peaceful, but last Saturday night, some people crossed the line between peaceful protest and violence, which resulted in several nights of enforced curfew. As people of faith committed to justice as modeled by Jesus Christ, we as a church are exploring ways to respond effectively to racism that is systemic in our society and specific in our city. So tonight we are presenting 3 interviews that will provide a beginning step for what we hope will be a long-standing effort of racial understanding and reconciliation within this church. And so I encourage you to listen closely to these interviews and take notes if you wish, as they contain many very good talking points for us in the next days and weeks. And so let us begin as we seek to find ways for a more just and fair future for people of color.
Our first interview tonight is with a friend of mine, Milt Thompson. Milt and I met through CICF Community or Center for
Central Indiana Community Foundation.
Thank you. It's like it just went right out of my head. Listening to a Seeing White podcast. Milt is a very involved, active member of the Indianapolis community and has worked hard for justice and to improve our city and our community, and so we've really had an opportunity to get to know some of his work a little bit better. He is a lawyer, or attorney, and he is a graduate of Wittenberg University and Indiana University for Law School. I had to look it up because he's involved in everything. But he received the Business and Philanthropy Award from the National Center of Black Philanthropy. He is considered an Indiana super lawyer by Indianapolis Monthly, and he is a member of the Academy of the Law Alumni Fellows. He also served on the Wittenberg Board of Trustees, president of Indiana University School of Law Board of Visitors, president of Indiana University School of Law Board Visitors Alumni Association, and former general counsel for the Pan American Games. He also has been involved with the Grand Slam, contract advisor of the NFL and NBA, a board member of the Indianapolis Indians Baseball Club, president and interim director of Big Brothers Big Sisters of Indiana, and the vice chair of the Indianapolis Foundation. So he has been involved and really very passionate about the work that goes on in the city. We actually are going to break up the interview into 2 parts because we had a really good conversation, and it went, we just didn't want to take away anything from his story, so we're thankful for that time. So we will be showing the second part of the interview next week. Okay, hi, IPC and Wednesday Night Live. It's Associate Pastor Reverend Maureen Wilson. I have with us Senior Pastor Robert Hymack and special guest Milton Thompson. Milt is a friend of mine who I met through his work with CICF, who hosted a listening group last year, probably about a year ago now, listening to the podcast Seeing White, which talks about the creation of race, and then the use of that concept to have power and control over other people. So the understanding of what whiteness is and how we use it to control other people in its creation. So the reality of race as a reality, but also as a construct. And so within that group, we listened to this podcast, sometimes together, sometimes separate. And then we went on to have some really interesting, sometimes hard, usually pretty uncomfortable conversations. And through that, Milt and I have continued to have a friendship and conversations. He's helped me with my public speaking, which I am famously have a growing edge on. But with everything that's going on in Indianapolis, Milt's been really, really involved. And so we were hoping that maybe pick your brain a little bit this morning about what's gone on over the last couple of weeks and how it's connected through the history of our city, our country, and our world.
Fantastic. Thank you for the invitation. Milt, can you tell us a little bit about your work with CICF and the inclusivity program that's been going on now?
Yeah, I suppose I won't get into the entire sordid history, although I'm the longest serving person in the entire operation, being appointed by the federal courts to the Indianapolis Foundation Trust, which was, I took the last 3 years of a 6-year term of former Governor Ed Welch. And at the end of every 6-year term, that person becomes the chairman of the Indianapolis Foundation. And it was at the end of my 3-year stint that I became president of the Indianapolis Foundation at quite a young age. We went through a lot of growth propositions before we actually even got into the serious work of community foundations. And we hired Brian Payne sometime thereafter, and began to really work on community foundation work, which had not really taken off in a significant way. But with the leadership of that and a community of very wonderful philanthropists, we were able to carve out some way towards community leadership, convening folks relative to solving major problems in our community. That transformed itself over some time into, and I became the inaugural chair of the Central Indiana Community Foundation, and took that role for a little longer than was its term, simply because we had so many mechanical things we had to acquire. But earlier on, our strategic plans revolved around high net worth individuals and how it is we would get that money into funds, and then how we would transfer the income from that into nonprofit organizations to be able to create more value. I've been telling my story in this whole work of equity and inclusion, and it's being left out was how my story really began. I had a reasonably successful law school career. I was president of our Student Bar Association. I was a national moot court champion, upper end of my class, and my dad had a business in town, so I said, that's nothing. I'll just go apply to the 3 largest law firms. I don't have to go to Wall Street or Sidley and Austin and Chicago or some others where I had some offers. Mind you, this was 1979. This was not prehistoric days. Although it may be to you younger folks, but it was pretty contemporary in my time. And I said, well, associates there are making $84,000 a year. I'll just apply to those 3 firms. I certainly have the qualifications and certainly have the capability of doing that. And I applied to those 3 large firms in our city. Names you could assume, don't have to name them. But one, I received a 22-page rejection letter. And the other 2 11-page rejection letters, I assume no collusion, but I suspect one could create in their minds what that might be. But why was I being rejected for an $84,000 a year opportunity and be relegated to a $13,500 a year job as a Marion County deputy prosecuting attorney? Well, it so happened that there was no one of color in any partnership role, not in any associate role. Well, not in any paralegal role, nor in any clerk's role or secretary's role, or even high school role that would carry legal documents from the courthouse back to the office. And that they were not culturally ready didn't really settle with me very well. My law school expenses weren't any less than the others in my peer group. Oh, by the way, when I passed the bar exam first time around, my salary moved from $13,500 to $18,500. So if you take that over a period of 5 years, and the cost of money, I mean that's close to $750,000 that I'll never get back, never ever in my career, no matter how successful whatever I would do. My baseline is already determined. Then there's some national studies from Annie Casey and otherwise that determined that the net worth of a family in Boston, of a white family in Boston, was $130,000. And then there's, well, what's the net value, notwithstanding the professional athletes in that robust community? What's the average net worth of a black family in Boston? And they said $8. I said $8, not $80,000, right? No, $8. Well, how can that be? Well, you start from a deficit. You don't transfer wealth. You're not in position to do those sort of things. And what is the only separator? Not job, not description, not education. The only distinction is the color of one's skin. Now, I could have operated and just be bitter, or I could decide to just be better. That became my operating mantra, is to just become better. So while I was practicing law in the Marion County Prosecutor's Office, I rose quickly to be the youngest supervisor on the staff under former prosecutor, former mayor Stephen Goldsmith. I became a lead trial attorney, tried cases that anyone my age would not have had the experience to do. And then I kind of moonlighted from there and started my own law practice, which ended up into a sports law practice, sports entertainment law practice. I then became involved in philanthropy, became a big brother, became the chairman of the board of the Big Brothers, and there were two discrete agencies. When the longtime executive director left, they asked if I would do a 4-month audit of the organization for its growth before going on a national search. Well, that 4 months turned into 2 years, and then it ultimately at its end became Big Brothers and Big Sisters of Central Indiana in that merger. So I kind of had my hands on where it is value comes along. My work at the Community Foundation also kind of led to discussions about nonprofit mergers, because the GIFT initiative had created more nonprofits in the state of Indiana than almost any place around. And good folks like Willis Bright at Lilly Endowment and others were helping from the inside out, and I was one of those that took the reins outside in and tried to create some opportunities around it. As I was teaching trial techniques at the law school, I became a counsel for the majority in the Indiana State Senate. I just kept on taking on roles outside of that while we were beginning to start my agency. Then came a time in the middle 80s that the city of Indianapolis, through the Indiana Sports Corporation, determined that they wanted to get into the international sports world, and through some diplomatic shuttle diplomacy relative to the world of basketball, got ourselves into the Pan American Games and ultimately became the general counsel for the Pan American Games. And part of that work was to travel to places with whom we have no diplomatic relations, including in Revolutionary Palace and Havana, Cuba, and negotiations with the notorious Fidel Castro to get their presence into the United States. This is experience. I'm learning different cultures. I'm learning international law. I'm learning to be immersed into different cultures. I'm understanding where it is that we are different, but we are exceptional yet at the same time. That became some of the basis for me as our emerging work in strategic plan. After the Undoing Racism piece, it became very intentional on our part to say, why don't we do something about this? I couldn't do that on my own. We had to create a credible board of directors over 25 years, which means we had to have more diverse folks on that board. And I was steadfast, along with some other community leaders, to say that this is important for a community foundation to not only have development capability, but also have an understanding of the community so that we might be able to reflect that community in our work. When we established that capability, then we knew that it would probably take a strong white man leader or white woman leader like Brian to literally say, we've got this wrong, folks. We've got to do it differently. And it was that epiphany that allowed us to really go into studying where are our deficiencies in our subsystems, where are there gaps in our relationships with others, where are the gaps that are stopping people from advancing. And if it is only the color of our skin, there's got to be something wrong with that. As it turned out, we learned and are continuing to learn, and folks are continuing to learn, that it was systematic. If you think about all of the major nationalities of the world, if you will, only one is named by a color. One. Who do you think that is? Just one. Everybody else is named by a section of the world. One by a color. It began there with the subjugation immediately. It became then the whipping boy to be able to create nation building, which is our the bane of our society is the advent of slavery. Do you think folks volunteered to get on the boat and go and be slaves? No, they didn't. They were employed. They overturned slave ships and went back to the Ivory Coast, and they went back to do the things that were of kings and queens. But when they discovered that they were communicating and overthrowing ships, and then they would mix up the tribes and languages, and then shackle them, and then use gunpowder. So things really became a forced entry into become free labor for the backbone and the growth of this country. And the only way to maintain that is to keep it down. I'm not going to reiterate a history here, but the fundamentals of why it is we believe this work is so important is it has to be transformative. Now, we just launched that 1 year ago on April 11th of 2019. And when I was there giving the final pitch about how people can get involved, it was then I said, you know what? That day would have been my dad's 100th birthday. And listening to his stories growing up through the Depression, being on the Delta Queen in the Navy, and the discrimination that he faced, and him building a business in 15 minutes from the Ku Klux Klan of the National Dragon, and the things he had to do to stay in business. If I had just an nth of that acumen, I'd be a far more successful business person as I am today. But it was from him that I really learned that backbone, how it is you have to, as we used to call it, pass. You had to pass as a white person, or to talk like a white person, or to suggest that the white person who is in charge wasn't even there. People would walk into my dad's shop on Southeastern Avenue and say, "Where's the boss?" My dad said, "Well, the boss, he's in Florida." Oh, really? So, well, how much does that step cost? It costs X amount of dollars. He said, "Well, who do I write the check out to?" My dad would say, "What's a check?" If you didn't have cash, you're not taking that step. The point was he had to learn how to get by in a quote unquote white man's world. You think a generation later,
like a lot of really important things, and I want to thank you for saying, like, I'm going to tell my story and just lifting up the parallels. It's really hard, one, to hear, and I know that the experience, like when you talk about you started out your career without representation. There was no representation, so there was no forward, and the consequences of that. And then, for the board and for myself as a white woman, a lot of times we talk about they just didn't know. We just didn't know. It shows how we get to where we got to this place in the last couple of weeks, and for not knowing our own history, or not knowing my own history as a white person and the creation of that. And how and then for you to say, like, we knew for us to get representation in the community, for the community, it was going to take a white male voice. Similarly to your story of your father, pretending that he wasn't the boss just to be taken seriously. Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just wanted to lift up a lot of really important things, and I want to make sure that, like, those are all given. I want you to know that, like, I heard that, and that was really painful.
Right. Well, your point is right on, Maureen, Pastor. When you're talking about how is it you articulate the things that are within your heart, and we talked about the lectionary, if I recall, in some conversations before you really got on a roll. By the way, your last sermon was brilliant, and it was meaningful, and I got a lot from it. But you began to do some things that I suggested then. You know the lectionary, you know the scripture, you know the stories that are being told. How do you retell those stories in a way that people will listen to you? How do you retell those stories that are consistent with the foot of the cross, yet at the same time reacting to contemporary emergency? And that's where our country is right now. It's in an emergency circumstance. Notwithstanding the pandemic, which obviously has a natural impact, although an expected impact upon disparate populations, in particular African-American folks. I even tire sometimes of the phrase African-American, because in my business world, I remember one time going for, quote unquote, a bid for a job. And they check off the box to be able to get a set aside. You will put African American, right? Until I discovered that we got beat out for a bid by some African Americans who were all Caucasian, by the way, from South Africa. They were more African American than I was. And I decided, well, you know what? That little piece of the box, I'm not going to check anymore. Because it's not what the law was intended for.
For our second interview today, we actually had a conversation last night with some of our IPC youth who had been involved with a protest march to the governor's home earlier this week. And so we wanted to know a little bit about their experience, what it was like, and so they are able to share why they were there and how that experience was for them. Hi guys, so welcome to a Zoom interview for Wednesday Night Live, and we have with us some of our IPC young adults and who have participated in last night's, well at this point 2 nights ago, a march down to the governor's mansion. And so they're going to tell us a little bit about that experience, but first I'd like to have them introduce themselves and say a little bit, you know, what's your name, how old are you, if you're in school, what school you're going to, so that the congregation or whoever's watching gets to know you a little bit. And so why don't we go ahead and start with Ethan.
Hi everyone, I'm Ethan. 21 years old. I go to Macalester College.
All right. Hi, I'm Autumn. I also go to Macalester College and I'm also 21 and I'm staying with the Shaws right now.
Let's keep it with the Shaws.
Hi, I'm Eli. I am 17. I go to Heron High School.
And my name is Eli Eckert. I am 18 and I go to Indiana University.
So Bob's on this call with us as well. Bob, how many of the people on this Zoom call have you baptized as children?
Let me see. I think there's 3 of them here.
3 of the 4.
I baptized you, Eli Eckert?
Yeah, you picked me up when I was 9.
Very good.
Very good. So you guys went down. Tell us a little bit about what made you want to get involved. What was the process that for your thinking, and for you guys, because y'all went, there's a picture, we've got a picture up here of you all with signs and a couple masks. Does anyone want to start off just saying a little bit about how the idea came to join that march?
Well, I had seen what was going on in other cities and in Indianapolis, and I heard Eli's story from his previous protest. And I felt that, because he was talking about all of the support from all of the citizens of Indianapolis. And I felt like there needed to be more citizen support and more people participating in protests, not because there weren't enough, but because this is a cause that should include everybody, because it's important to fight for justice and equality for everybody.
Thank you, Eli. Eli Eckert, you were mentioned there about your experience. Can you expand on that?
Yeah. So our last protest being last night, like when this came out 2 nights ago, 2 days before the protest that all of us attended, we had a very large protest downtown that stayed downtown. I think it was probably the largest one that's been had yet. It happened on Saturday night. It was officially scheduled from 4 to 7. We were at the War Memorial and University Park downtown. We marched to the Circle, and a lot of people spoke there. We ended up marching back, and the protest was officially or legally finished at 7, but the people once again took to the streets for another 2 hours downtown to keep fighting for their cause. At 9, we were turned around by the police into more police. And after making a peaceful demonstration of us not leaving, we were tear gassed. And after that originally happened, more people, or most people left, who decided to stay behind, and they got on their knees in front of the police to say that we were peaceful and that we weren't doing something that warranted what they were showing us. And those people were also tear gassed again. After that was when things definitely started to turn south throughout the rest of downtown, I'd say. After that, there was a lot more that went on. I wish hadn't gone on, but yeah, I don't know what to say.
Ethan, Autumn, do you want to talk a little bit about your decision making for going and getting involved yesterday?
I thought it was a foregone conclusion. I went to stand in solidarity with a movement that is deepening, a movement toward liberation that I think needs the widest support. And I went to like I said, stand in solidarity with it.
Yeah, along the same lines. We both go to school in St. Paul, which is a part of the Twin Cities metropolitan area. And personally, as a person of color and as someone that's had a lot of different experiences with the Minneapolis Police Department, and yeah, it wasn't a hard decision to decide to go and march with them Monday night for that reason.
So what did you guys see when you were beginning the march? You know, what were the conversations that were going on with people who were involved? You know, I've seen a lot of live feeds and you hear multiple stories, but I would really like to hear from you guys what that felt like and what you were seeing.
Would this be at the beginning, like the very beginning of when we started marching towards the governor's mansion, or? Yeah, okay.
You say whatever you want.
Yeah. So before we even marched to the governor's mansion, there was another march around downtown before that happened. And everything, just like the rest of the protest, was very peaceful. People made sure to let cars through so that that wasn't a reason that police could decide to stop the march, which was really thoughtful. But while it was going on still, I think this, like, one of the scariest things, especially, I mean, to everybody there, was that even through doing that just downtown, we were told that the National Guard had just been brought in with dogs and live rounds, and that they were authorized to use them when nothing wrong was going on. And I think that is really something that I know got to me and got to a lot of people. Because I mean, I think most people can agree that that doesn't seem, what was going on and what was being warranted by police or the National Guard didn't weigh the same. So that was, I think that was a pretty big mark on the night for what people were talking about and what people were scared about. Everybody there, I think the biggest thing, I mean, no matter how scared people were there, they knew that that was an option that police could use going into it. And then even through that, despite that, they were willing to march for the cause and give their lives for it if necessary, which is pretty crazy to me. Because people didn't leave after they heard that, and that's something that I think is really special. And people, I mean, if you watched the news last night, you saw people, or one of the leaders of the group, giving an interview saying that they were willing to die right then and there for it. And I think that that's something really powerful to say and to hear, because that was something that could have happened.
Yeah. Thanks, Eli. That's important stuff. Very profound. Ethan and Autumn, when you arrived at the governor's mansion, what in your mind was the demonstration trying to say to the governor and to other government leaders?
I think it depends on who you ask. I mean, going to the, based on what had happened like the night before and a lot of the violence that had happened from the police against protesters, I think it was kind of a challenge to the police saying that, are you willing to do this when we're in front of the governor's house? And I also know just kind of making it more visible, because we were going through Meridian Heights, which is one of the more higher income spaces in Indianapolis. So very easy to be isolated in a part of your own bubble, especially during these kind of incidents. So I think bringing that to them was one of the statements, not the entire one, but I think that was definitely one of the points.
I think in the minds of the organizers, this was meant to bring, yes, the demands that they had written out directly to the governor, and failing that, to show scenes of police repression and police violence right in front of, the state executive.
So how did it turn out? How did that protest end last night?
The protest ended with one singular cop took off his riot gear, and so the other cops decided to join, and then they walked south with us for a block, and then that's when we decided that it was probably the best idea to get to where Eli's mom was parked. But to me, it's mind-boggling that only one officer was unwilling to do physical harm to a peaceful gathering of people.
But it ended peacefully.
Yes, which that is something to be thankful for, but I just don't think that it's a good thing that only one cop was willing to lay down his riot gear.
Okay.
So what would you like the congregation to know? I mean, like you said, Autumn, there's some very isolated communities. They have higher income, predominantly white. Not a lot of our IPCers live downtown. And you guys are within this age range that is taking up these causes, these just causes. And so how can us in the congregation, who, especially at this time, some people cannot physically go outside. It is not safe for them. What do you want them to know? What do you want us to know, and how we can support what you've seen, what you've participated in, and especially, you know, those voices that, you know, as someone who's white, knowing that it's not necessarily a time when my voice is the leadership, but needs to be echoing and supporting those voices that have been oppressed. That was a big thing.
Other people feel free to add to this. I think that there's not only one role to play in this. I think there are a lot of different roles that anybody can play in this. I don't think that, first off, not everybody can go out and protest physically. That's not an option for everybody. But through that, there's so many roles to play. There's caretakers of the people that decide to go out, and there's people that spread awareness through other ways, and there's people that give their resources. There were churches out there yesterday giving, like the churches in Indianapolis, giving food and water to people as they marched and while we were gathered around the circle. And I think that was a really cool thing to see. But besides that, I think when it comes to issues of social justice, one of the biggest things that I connect with in my faith is that God tells us that when we live in abundance, that it's our obligation to share that. That's what I've been taught. And so I think, with everything that, especially with, or as privileged as we are, us in particular that attended last night, and many other members of our congregation, that because what God's blessed us with, because of this abundance that we've been given, it's definitely our job to help those that don't have the same abundance that we do. And just because of our skin color, our jobs, I think, that we can do, obviously this movement isn't about us. Our role is to protect and to support. And with what we have, I think that is a really important job.
Good theology there, Eli.
Anybody else want to share what you would like to say to the congregation about this whole situation?
Well, I would invite watchers to understand the history, to understand how interconnected this issue is to the existence of an unequal, violent society and the necessity for thoroughgoing change of every facet. I'll leave my comments there.
Guys, we are so proud of you and thankful for you for the ways that you have used your voices to connect and join and support those. As your church, as like I said, Bob baptized you guys and we've known you for so long. It's been such a blessing to see you become these strong, smart, and giving people. We just couldn't be more proud of you. I know your families feel that same way too.
Truly. And just to add one thing, you're truly living out a kind of model of faith that Jesus lived out, faith of giving, sharing, a faith of wisdom, knowing that we are the privileged ones, and it is our opportunity to help those who can't help themselves, those who are fighting injustices around our city, around the world. It is and you mentioned it, Eli, you've been taught that it is our responsibility to reach out. And so I congratulate you for feeling this passionately and acting it out in your lives. Thank you on behalf of us. Thank you.
Well, it was nice to see you guys. I know it's been a long time, but we're very thankful that you are able to spend some time with us for the Zoom and to contribute for Wednesday Night Live. It's been a very somber week, but it is nice to see your faces. And thank you for sharing your stories and sharing your time with us.
As we said, we're very proud of our young people in this church. Our final interview tonight is with two elders from Emmanuel Presbyterian Church, which is located on 38th Street. It is predominantly an African American church, and over the past few years, many of us have become acquainted with Emmanuel. I am the moderator of their session. We have had conversations in Christ Cafe with members of the church. We have worshiped with them on several occasions. And so I contacted two of their elders, Joe Matthews and Willis Bright, to talk about our relationship with them and also listening to them talk about racial reconciliation and racial justice from a faith perspective and things that churches might think about, especially predominantly white churches, might think about in terms of racial justice. And so let's listen with Joe and Willis. Hello, Irvington Presbyterians. I'm here with Joe Matthews and Willis Bright, both of whom are elders at Emmanuel Presbyterian Church. And I've been fortunate to be able to moderate their session over the past few years and have gotten to know Joe and Willis and their spouses, along with some other elders and members of Emmanuel Church, and have developed a friendship with them and certainly appreciate the reciprocal friendship that they have offered me too. And so in light of all of the events over the past week with the murder of George Floyd, I wanted to talk with Joe and Willis about what they're thinking in terms of, their own lives, but also in terms of the faith community and looking at, other churches and what a proper response would be from our churches. So, Joe and Willis, let me just throw out this question to you. What was going through your mind when you heard about the murder and the death of George Floyd a week and a day ago? Yeah, so either one of you can start.
Well, I was just overwhelmed, quite frankly, because I saw the video on that and I kept thinking somebody on the ground there was going to say, hey, give me a break. It didn't happen when we saw the video. And that was really within a week or so of the gunning down of the young man in Indianapolis. Yeah. So in my mind, I was like, man, this is a straw that breaks the camel's back. We ought to do something. And the something was overwhelming. I was very emotional. I was here with Lucy at the house, and we were both saying, "Oh my goodness, I wanted to go do something."
Yeah.
But I dare not leave the house at that point. I've had a chance to get mother reports and see some other things going on, but the issue still is one that it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that was illegal, that was violent, that was inhumane, and from a police officer, along with the guys that were with him on the ground there, they ought to all be in jail for one. I may be going too much talking. Willis has a better appreciation for this, but even with the charge that was raised for him with third degree, if you saw the background on that, that's basically accidental and assumes no guilt. It's like it just happened, and that is just BS.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think we have to, individually, we have to acknowledge what we saw, and individually, we may have to commit ourselves and what, if any, action are we going to take, or we just going to be on the sideline? And I think it's time now that Christian folks need to get off the sideline and get involved. Now, what the involvement might be may be open for discussion. A violent protest is probably not the order today, but a consistent protest in terms of folks who can make a difference is.
Okay. Thanks, Joe. Willis?
Yeah, my first reaction when I saw the video was, I'm watching a man take another man's life right in front of my eyes. I'm watching a murder be committed, and I'm watching people beg that individual who had the power in that situation to do something about it, feel so threatened themselves that they couldn't physically intervene to stop it. And the people who could, the fellow officers, were doing nothing. And at the same time, I couldn't help but feel that the way things have gone as it relates to force used by police, even with visible evidence of an infraction against an individual, against a community, against society, against humanity. And when I heard that there were factors related to his physical health being brought in, and that he maybe had high blood pressure and other things, I said, oh, here we go again. Yeah. We're going to throw in all those things and basically say, well, while the foot on the neck maybe contributed, there were some other things that were, again, because of his physical condition, that were major contributors. So therefore, we will exonerate this officer.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so in terms of first reactions, just being overwhelmed with the reality of watching somebody be killed in front of me, and then also knowing that that may not be sufficient evidence for many Americans to feel that this is an issue and to want to do something, and to know that even the laws that have been created to protect police, even by the Supreme Court, make it very easy for them to be exonerated in this kind of a situation.
Yeah, so is this a issue for the police? Is it a issue for the government? Is it an issue for everyone? You know, we're centered on the police right now, but it seems like this is way more widespread.
I think it's an issue for all of that. Unfortunately, it is one that there's just a history of this kind of response to that kind of incident that is repeated over and over and over and over. I think Willis touched on that. It's just institutionalized. It's beyond racism. It is a culture in some police departments. Now, I acknowledge that my involvement with police forces across the years, that there are good officers out there, but there's no excuse for what we saw. And yet, even the scenario that's being painted right now suggests that what Willis just said is what's beginning to happen. At least that's where it was going. And when you start talking about having to be very deliberate in terms of our investigation, et cetera, it just kind of suggested me individually that what you saw, it didn't really happen. that's not what really happened.
Mm-hmm.
Can't believe what you saw.
Yeah.
You know, which is crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
The autopsy report that has come from the coroner's office and the one that has come from someone hired by the family, there's already a difference.
Yes.
The one that was hired by the family says what we all saw. This man was asphyxiated. The one from the official one says something else. But in response, you know, it's not just about the police. Police act in response to how the reward system is set up for them.
Sure.
What are the boundaries that are established for them? And basically in terms of how they feel they will be expected to respond by the citizens. And when you have national leadership basically telling them, do what you need to do what you want to do, just suppress this by any means necessary, that gives license for those elements within police departments who would be abusive to be so. I would say very comfortably that most police want to do the best thing and want to protect all citizens and want to do the best by all. But there are elements within, much as there were elements within the demonstrators who had no intent to do anything but create chaos. Now, the rumors on the street are that many of the folks who led some of the destruction were planted people by folks who want to show and create a situation that would lend itself to a political narrative.
Mm-hmm.
A political narrative that would say we need more police force, that we need more controls,
Mhm.
that these represent a political perspective that is really being taken advantage of. Even one of the officials going in front of a church and using that church without permission or even informing the officialdom of that church that they were going to do a photo op.
Right.
So when you have individual citizens and police getting that kind of an endorsement, no wonder. So, I mean, I think it is a police issue in the sense that even here in Indy, there's an effort to create a board that would have civilians on it that will refuse use of force. But the way it's currently being presented, there will be twice as many people representing police and other city interests than there would be civilians.
Mhm.
While the gesture is good, it doesn't go far enough. I think that as I heard someone that I was on a panel with, she said, everybody's got to, first of all, look in the mirror and see how they are treating other people, what assumptions they make about others, what do they tolerate being said in the circles they operate in, what do they tolerate in the workplace that they are in. It gets down to that level as well as to get to examine how hiring policies are run, how we're getting ready to come up where with the census, where we will be setting political boundaries. With an incomplete census because of COVID, there could be boundaries that will further have an imbalance in terms of depriving poor people, depriving people of color of adequate representation. So, I mean, it's really being sensitive on all of those levels to equity, to justice, to fairness.
Yeah. Thanks. let me shift it a little bit, shift the conversation a little bit, and I've only got like 6 minutes left with you guys. Both of you are elders in the Presbyterian Church, and one of the things I've always appreciated about the two of you is your honesty and your authenticity about social justice issues, racial injustices, and your willingness to talk to a white community, a white church like Irvington Presbyterian Church, which is 95% white, about your experiences and the systemic problem, not just in society, but also in churches. So in looking at my church and my congregation, what would you say to us? What would you say in sincerity and honesty? This is what you as individuals you can do. This is what as a corporate body, as a church you can do. This is what we need. This is the support, that we need. What would you say to that?
That's a really great set of questions, Bob.
And I know it's a big question. It's not a 6-minute question. It's a 6-hour, 6-day question. But you need to be brief.
Yeah. I'll say quickly, one of the things that folk can do is in the quietness of their homes is individually look in the mirror and say, what do I really want to do? Do I recognize injustice? Do I recognize something that just does not make sense? Implicit bias and all these other issues are real. But if you don't see that, then you don't see where you really have a need to do anything. But if in your heart, you, the individual, the mom, the dad, the children, if you see that there is something wrong, you may not necessarily agree with the magnitude and conclude that I would like to be more aggressive and more involved and begin to change the narrative of what we're seeing. That's a long-term look. That's not an overnight look.
Right.
There's a way to go forward because we can have conversations about how to do that. But if individually I'm not willing to even for a minute think that what I saw in the film can be explained away, then prayer may be the best thing that you can do for you.
Yeah.
And don't come out of the prayer closet.
I'll be real brief. We had some conversation with members of your congregation, a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And we did some visiting and all that after that. I'd say what's happened as a result of that? How has that made a difference in the lives of individual people who were parts of those conversations? How has it made any difference in the way the church functions in terms of what it is doing internally and what is it doing externally?
Yeah. That
in and of itself is a good basis for beginning to determine what these kinds of things mean. Then I think, as Joe said, suggesting people examining themselves individually, but then what does that say about what people need to get engaged within the larger community to be advocating for, to be voting for? What are the kinds of people what questions do you ask of the people that you want representing you in the legislature, on the city county council? And it's out fundamentally at the level that things that people can control, as well as electing the kind of people that they believe would have institute the policies and practices that are going to be. It's looking at the companies that you buy your food from. It's looking at all those things and making decisions. No, I won't support an organization or I won't support a business that does this. But if I see that one is being more affirmative in what they do, hey, I'll lend my support to them.
Okay. That's awesome. Yeah, that's exactly the kind of things that we want to talk about in a church. And this Sunday school class that met with you met last Sunday, and really to begin, or not to begin, but to start up that conversation again, because I admitted, it's easy to let that drop as a white person. It's easy to let that drop and let other people take the charge of that, even when you do support the kind of justice issues. So I do believe that that this whole week, after this murder, is changing people in the conversations that I've had. So I do want to thank you for sharing that, and I do think that our church is very interested in continuing or starting up that conversation again with Emmanuel, with some of your folks, and so that we can kind of light that fire within us again, and hopefully take it somewhere. So,
Right.
so
Great.
thank you, Joe. Thank you, Willis. I'm going to end the recording now.
And hello to all the people we know.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Good to see you.
So thank you for listening to these interviews. We know they were a little long, but they're very important in terms of helping us to try to understand the unsettling events of the past week and a half. We will continue to carry on conversations and, in fact, expand these congregations, hopefully over the whole congregation, in the next few weeks and months. With that said, I invite us now to close in prayer. The prayer that we are using was written by a young man involved in the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship. His name is Timothy Wolfring. Mo and I will share in this prayer. It's a very powerful prayer of racial justice and the lament that we have according to these times. And so let us pray together.
O God of raging fires, O Jesus, who looted the temple, O Spirit, found amongst grief and protest, we come before you in anguish. We remember this weekend the day of Pentecost, when the Spirit roared into that upper room and breathed new languages on the tongues of the apostles. It's a time of celebration for the church, but most of us don't feel like a party. Recently, another one of your children, George Floyd, had his breath forcefully removed, O Lord. We are tired and frustrated and angry. How long, O Lord, will you continue to do nothing? We understand that the Spirit breathes into the church life and love, but we are hyperventilating and can't focus. George Floyd is only one of the many black people the state and white supremacists have killed this year, including Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. May we be the church who shows up to protest in vigil.
Oh God, in a season of Pentecost, we also remember that after the new converts were baptized, they immediately joined the work of mutual aid. Help us to continue this tradition, mutual aid as the means of intentionally sharing resources so that all may benefit. With what we have, may we donate to bail funds and other organizations that support the lives of black people. As the world has been quiet because of quarantine, racism, and state violence continue to wreak havoc on the oppressed, but you, O God, shout, "Black Lives Matter," alongside protesters. And you, O Christ, understand state suffering and stand in solidarity with them. And you, O Spirit, sit with the grieving families of Floyd, Arbery, and Taylor. Continue to remind us the church is not a building, but a gathering of people demanding and living out another world, a world without violence, a world where mutual aid is our economy, not capitalism, and a world where everyone and everything is loved unconditionally. May this prayer and every prayer not be the end of our work, but the beginning. We pray this in the name of Christ, who walks alongside us in this struggle. Amen.
Amen.
With that said, we close this edition of Wednesday Night Live. And so we encourage you to be with us for our live stream this Sunday at 10 o'clock. And so I invite you to pray together,
And stay together.
and please join us this Sunday. Bye-bye.